All right, everyone. We are going to spend the rest of class looking at the story of salvation history. We're going to go over the whole thing in one shot so that we've got a lovely foundation for everything to come. We're going to start by going through this timeline. It'll take about 5 minutes just to explain this for those of you that have never seen it before. It's two-sided and incredibly helpful. Turn to the first side where it says early world. Do you all see early world there on the top left? All right, so along the top, we've got the headings that describe what's going on in Israel's history. I'm just going to read off all the headings. Early world, patriarchs, Egypt and Exodus, desert wanderings, conquest and judges, royal kingdom, divided kingdom, exile, return, Maccabean revolt, messianic fulfillment, and the church. So there's all of your Bible history in a nutshell.
Okay, I got it.
All right, go back to early world. Yeah, you got it. You're all good. Under early world, it says Genesis 1 through 11. That line right there tells you what part of the Bible tells this part of the story. Now, what's interesting is there's 73 books in the Bible, but you can tell the plot of the story in just 14 books, 14 historical books that go one right after the other. I'm going to read those out loud. Those books are Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, Ezra, Nehemiah, 1st Maccabees, Luke, and Acts. So, if you're feeling ambitious, that's a good alternative to reading through the Bible. By the time you're done with this class, you're going to be more than equipped to read through those 14 books, because that'll be everything we just covered. So if you want to really get a good grasp on the Bible, take this class and then go read those 14 books. You'll really have a handle on the Bible after that. All right, under Genesis 1 through 11, where it says one holy couple, one holy family, one holy tribe, those are the covenants. Those are the different covenants that God makes with his people. And notice how each one gets bigger as God's family grows, until it finally ends up with one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. All right, under the covenants, you've got the bouncy red line. What in the world is that? That is the genealogy of Jesus. The people on that red line are the ancestors of Jesus. So, why does the line bounce? Well, way on the far left, it's on the timeline, it says northern countries, the land of Canaan, south and Egypt. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. So where the red line is tells you where the action is taking place. Up top, northern countries, that's Babylon. Middle is the land of Canaan, Israel, and the bottom is Egypt. So there's where the people are. In the little boxes scattered all over the middle, you've got the major events like number 1, creation, number 2, fall. And all the way down at the bottom, it tells you the approximate dates of this time period. For early world, it's just creation through 2000 BC. Below that, it tells you what's the world power at this point in history. It starts with Egypt. And below that, it tells you what's going on in secular history. The first event they've got listed is when the Great Pyramids were built. So, there's how to read this timeline. It's got an incredible amount of information in it about what's going on in the Bible when. Really good for helping to get a handle on things. Now, you can keep your timelines open in front of you. You'll probably want to. We're going to take a walk through the entire Bible. We're going to look at God's plan of forgiveness, mercy, and salvation. And we're going to take a look at who trusted God and who didn't. Here goes. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created everything perfect. And he created us human beings to share in his own divine life and happiness. We're created in his image. We have intelligence and reason, creativity, capacity to love. God also gave us free will, the freedom to choose our actions. The first human beings abused that gift of freedom and chose not to follow God. By turning away from God, human beings, as well as creation itself, became corrupted and subject to death. You see, when people turn away from God, they turn away from life itself. God is life. God is love. God is ultimate reality. When we sin, we're turning away from those things. And we become these selfish little beings wrapped in on ourselves, filled with our own fretful wants and desires, imprisoned in ourselves. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Yeah, that's what sin does to us. But ever since people first turned away from God, God has been calling us back. He is still the great champion of free will. He never forces anyone to come back. But he does tell us in the strongest possible terms that only with him can there possibly be life and life abundantly. Immediately after they sinned, God promised Adam and Eve that he would one day send humanity a savior. God expressed his desire to draw all people to himself by establishing a covenant with Noah and his descendants. That is to say, with every person on the earth. Yet, Noah's descendants set themselves against God, building a tower to reach the heavens out of sheer pride, the Tower of Babel. So, to limit the damage that arrogant people could do, God confused their languages and scattered them over the earth. In their pride, people lost the knowledge of God and became pagans, worshiping all kinds of different idols. Now, we come to our next time period, the time of the patriarchs. In order to reveal himself in a deep way to humanity, God cultivated one nation on earth as his very own, giving them particular knowledge of himself. That was Israel. That's right. The Jewish people became the foundation from which the rest of the world would ultimately learn about God and his salvation. God began forming Israel by calling a man named Abram. Just so you can picture how this ties in with world history. Abram lived around the year 2000 BC in the city of Ur in ancient Mesopotamia. It's that first civilization that we all learn about in world history class back in high school with the ziggurats and the Code of Hammurabi and cuneiform tablets, the Fertile Crescent. Does this all ring a bell? Yeah, that's where Abraham lived. So, God called Abram, an elderly man, to leave his home, take his relatives, take everything he owned, and resettle in a far distant land, the land of Canaan. Did Abram trust God? Yes, he did. And for that, God made a covenant with him, renaming him Abraham, which means the father of many nations. Quite a name to give to someone who doesn't have any kids. Yeah, we'll hear more about that story in a couple more weeks. But God made 3 promises to Abraham that lay the groundwork for the rest of the Bible. You can find them in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. There's the rest of the Bible in a nutshell. But you can also find them on your timeline right in front of you, where it says Abrahamic covenant. God promised Abraham's descendants 3 things: land, a kingdom, and worldwide blessing. The first promise was the land of Canaan. That's why it's called the Promised Land. That promise was fulfilled when Moses and Joshua led the children of Israel out of Egypt and into the land flowing with milk and honey. The second promise was that Abraham's descendants would be kings. This was fulfilled by King David and all of the kings that came after him. The third promise was that all the people of the earth would be blessed through Abraham. That was fulfilled with Jesus. Abraham eventually had a son, Isaac, who had a son, Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons who were the founding fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. They've got all 12 of them in a little box there on your chart. There's the 12 tribes of Israel. 2 of these sons are especially important for now. Judah, he's on the red line. He's the ancestor of Jesus. You've heard Jesus called the Lion of the tribe of Judah? Yeah, And then there's Joseph. Joseph moves the whole plot of the story forward. I think I'll tell you the story of Joseph because it's fun. You want to hear it? Yeah, Chess is nodding back there. Okay. Joseph had visions. He had visions that one day his brothers would bow down to him, which seemed terribly unlikely because he was kid 11 of 12. And his brothers hated him because he was the father's favorite. He got the coat of many colors, didn't have to work. And so Joseph once told his brothers about this vision from God. Someday, you're going to bow down to me. And his brothers let him know what they thought of this idea by selling him into slavery. Joseph was taken down into Egypt by slavers, and from there things only got worse. The wife of his master tried to seduce him. Joseph refused for moral reasons. And she made accusations against him, had Joseph thrown in prison. So now Joseph is languishing in prison, and he still remembers his promise to God that, or his promise that God made him that someday his brothers are going to bow down to him. Does Joseph trust God? Yes. Yes, he does. He does not despair. He realizes that God's still got a plan for him, that God keeps his promises. So, Joseph, he's still got this gift from God, too, of having visions and of interpreting dreams. Some years pass, and Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh dreams about 7 fat cows that are eaten up by 7 skinny cows. And Pharaoh says, "Who can tell me the meaning of this dream?" One of Pharaoh's advisors says, "Oh, there's a man down in prison that can do dreams. I'll get him for you." Pulls up Joseph in front of Pharaoh. And Joseph says, "Your dream means that there will be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of terrible famine." Pharaoh tells Joseph, "Great, you're in charge of the relief effort. Get to it." And just like that, Joseph went from being a slave in prison to Prime Minister of Egypt. Number 2 in the kingdom. 7 years pass. Egypt is prepared for the famine. Nowhere else is. From all around, people flood into Egypt, refugees, because everywhere else they're starving. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt. They come before Joseph. They don't recognize him, and they bow at his feet and say, "We need food." Joseph tests them. He wants to know if they've changed, if they're better than they used to be. They pass the test, and he reveals who he is. They all make up. He forgives his brothers, and he and Pharaoh invite the whole extended family to come down and live in Egypt. You can have the best land. So the family of Jacob, all 12 tribes, come down to Egypt. They're honored guests of the Pharaoh because Joseph is the great hero who saved Egypt. And all of the Israelites live in Egypt happily ever after. The end.
There's a whole lot more here.
Yeah, not quite. So, now we reach the time period of Egypt and Exodus. For 400 years, the Israelites became slaves in Egypt. The time of Joseph passed until a Pharaoh came that had never heard of Joseph. He made the Israelites slaves. God called Moses to lead them out of slavery. God called to Moses from the burning bush and told him, "I want you to go to Pharaoh and say, 'Let my people go.'" Did Moses trust God? You know, he had a tough time with it at first. I mean, the Charlton Heston version didn't. The Charlton Heston version was more than ready to go in there. But the version in Exodus, he said, "Not me, I don't do public speaking. Tell my brother Aaron to do it instead." But Moses went anyway. He put one foot in front of the other, he went back to Egypt, and with his brother Aaron, went up in front of Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And after the first plague or two, Moses trusted God. He got the hang of it. God freed the Israelites from slavery by all sorts of miracles. You have the 10 plagues. You've got the first Passover, where the angel of death comes for the firstborn, and God tells the Israelites, "Slaughter a lamb, take the blood of the lamb and paint it on your doorposts, and the angel of death will pass over you." And so from that point forward, the Israelites celebrated every year how they were saved from death by the blood of the Lamb. Looking forward to Jesus. God brought them out of Egypt, parted the Red Sea for them, saved them from the Egyptian army. And the Israelites were intensely grateful for about 3 days. God then led them through the wilderness in a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. He fed them with manna from heaven. He gave them water from a rock. And then God spoke to them at Mount Sinai and said, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. I am the one who rescued you from slavery. God gave them the law, the 10 Commandments, and established a priesthood to show the Israelites how to live and how to worship him. His people learned that God is all good, all holy, all powerful, all loving, and that he protected and cared for them. Did the Israelites trust him? No. Here we move into the desert wanderings. Desert wanderings, the book of Numbers. Despite all the wonders they saw and all the miracles God worked to protect them, the Israelites never did trust him. They made a golden calf to worship. They constantly turned to other idols. They constantly grumbled against God. We're sick of manna. We want meat. Enough of this miraculous food. Well, God gave them quail. They weren't very happy then either. Did God keep protecting them? Yes. He gave them second chances time and time again. He kept feeding them with manna from heaven. Their clothes never wore out for those 40 years in the wilderness. The soles of their shoes never wore through in all that wandering. God revealed himself to them as a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. And still, the Israelites wouldn't trust him. We get to Numbers 13. 1 year after they left Egypt. This is after the 10 Commandments. After they've built the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle. God leads them in that pillar of cloud and pillar of fire to the edge of the promised land. It's time to go in. Moses sends in some spies to scout out the land. And the spies come back saying, there's giants in the land. There's huge cities. There's big, thick walls. We feel like grasshoppers next to these people. We can't go in there. And the people won't go in. Only 2 people want to go in. 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb. Out of 2 million people, they're the 2 that trust God. But everyone else picks up rocks to stone Joshua and Caleb to death. And at that point, God comes down and says, because you will not go into the promised land, the land I've prepared for you, the land I have promised to give you. Have it your way. You're going to wander in the desert for 40 years. Your children will go in. At that point, they went, never mind, we're ready to go into the promised land now. And they started marching in. It didn't work. They'd used up all their chances at that point. So they wandered in the desert for 40 years. After 40 years of wandering, Moses died. We've now reached the time period of conquest and judges. It was time for Joshua to lead the Israelites into the promised land. The battle plan God gave him involved marching around the city of Jericho for 7 days and watching its walls tumble to the ground. Did Joshua trust God? Absolutely. You bet he did. And for a brief moment in history, the Israelites did too. They were done with wandering in the wilderness. And so to enter the promised land, they followed every crazy order God and Joshua gave them. And there were quite a few. But once they settled in the promised land and that generation passed, the Israelites forgot about God and turned back to idols once more. That's the book of Judges. If you look at your timeline, you'll see a box that says 12 judges and a circle that says 7 times. The judges were all regional leaders, so that's why there's 12 of them, but they go through this cycle 7 times. 7 times the Israelites follow this cycle of sin, servitude, supplication, salvation, and silence.